What he saw through his viewfinder froze him in place. Hundreds of civilian bodies, women, children, babies, and the killers were his own soldiers, American soldiers. Army photographer Ron Haeberle photographed hell that day in My Lai, and it nearly cost him his life. Welcome to Classified Hidden Histories, where we uncover the secrets they never wanted you to know. I'm your host, and today we're diving into the story of the man who documented America's darkest war crime and became a target for telling the truth March 16, 1968. Ron Haeberle woke before dawn at his base in Chu Lai, South Vietnam. At 26 years old, he'd been in Vietnam for 8 months as an Army combat photographer, documenting operations for military publications and historical records. It was supposed to be a safe job. Stay behind the front lines, take pictures of successful operations, avoid direct combat. That morning, Haeberle was assigned to accompany Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, on a search and destroy mission to a village called My Lai. Intelligence reports claimed the village was a Viet Cong stronghold, possibly harboring enemy fighters and weapons. The mission seemed routine. Haeberle packed his gear, his official Army-issued camera loaded with black and white film for military records, and his personal Nikon camera loaded with color film that he planned to use for his own documentation. He'd learned to carry both. The Army owned everything shot on official equipment, but personal photographs belonged to him. As helicopters lifted off carrying Charlie Company toward My Lai, Haeberle felt the familiar mix of anxiety and adrenaline that came with combat operations. He'd been on dozens of missions like this, photographing soldiers moving through villages, questioning locals, searching for weapons. Sometimes there was gunfire, usually there wasn't. Today felt like it would be another routine day. The helicopters touched down in rice paddies just outside My Lai around 7:30 a.m. Haeberle jumped out with the assault force, his cameras ready. The village was quiet, morning cooking fires sending thin streams of smoke into the sky. It looked peaceful, almost pastoral. Then the shooting started. At first, Haeberle thought Charlie Company had encountered enemy resistance. Soldiers were firing their weapons, moving through the village with tactical precision. He raised his camera and began photographing, capturing images of American troops in action. But something felt wrong. Haeberle couldn't hear return fire. The villagers running from their homes weren't armed fighters. They were farmers, women, children, and the soldiers weren't just firing warning shots. They were executing people. Haeberle watched through his viewfinder, his finger frozen on the shutter button, as a group of soldiers herded Vietnamese civilians into a ditch. Old men, women holding babies, children clinging to their mothers. The civilians were crying, begging, clearly terrified. An officer gave an order. The soldiers opened fire. Haeberle's camera captured it all. Click, bodies falling. Click, blood spreading in the dirt. Click, a mother trying to shield her child with her body. Click, the child killed anyway. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. These were American soldiers, men he'd eaten breakfast with that morning, executing unarmed civilians. It wasn't combat, wasn't self-defense, wasn't an accident. It was murder. Haeberle moved through the village in a daze, his photographer's instinct taking over even as his conscience screamed. Every building he entered revealed new horrors, bodies piled in doorways, families shot in their homes, children killed while trying to hide, the elderly executed where they sat. At one point, Haeberle photographed a group of women and children moments before soldiers killed them. He captured their faces, terrified, confused, pleading. Then he photographed their bodies moments later, sprawled in the dirt. Should he stop taking pictures and try to intervene? Could one photographer stop an entire company of soldiers engaged in systematic slaughter? Would his protests save anyone, or just get him killed too? Haeberle kept shooting. Every photograph was evidence. Every frame documented a war crime. If he didn't photograph this, no one would believe it happened by noon. The killing had stopped. Charlie Company had murdered 504 unarmed civilians in My Lai, 182 women, 173 children, 60 elderly men. The youngest victim was 1 year old. Not a single weapon was found in the village. As helicopters evacuated the company back to base, Haeberle sat in stunned silence, his cameras heavy in his lap. He'd shot over 100 photographs documenting the massacre, some on official army film, some on his personal color film, evidence of the worst war crime in American military history. Back at base that afternoon, Haeberle developed the official army photographs in the military darkroom. The black and white images showed soldiers moving through the village, conducting operations, dealing with civilians. Without context, they could pass for routine combat photography. But Haeberle's personal color photographs told a different story. The vibrant color made the horror impossible to dismiss. Bright red blood, children in colorful clothes, the green of rice paddies stained with death. These photographs were undeniable evidence of mass murder. Haeberle didn't know what to do with them. He couldn't submit them through official channels. The army would confiscate and destroy them. But keeping them felt dangerous. If his superiors discovered he'd documented the massacre, they might consider him a threat. Days passed, then weeks. Haeberle heard rumors about My Lai, whispers that something bad had happened, that civilians had been killed, that questions were being asked. But officially, Charlie Company had conducted a successful operation against enemy forces. The military's official report claimed 128 Viet Cong killed with minimal civilian casualties. Haeberle knew the truth. He had proof. But he remained silent. For over a year, Haeberle carried the secret of My Lai. He completed his tour in Vietnam and returned to the United States in late 1968, his cameras and their terrible evidence packed safely in his luggage. He got a civilian job, tried to resume normal life, but the photographs haunted him. Every night, Haeberle saw the faces from My Lai, the mother trying to protect her child, the elderly man shot while praying, the children piled in the ditch. The images played on loop in his mind, a horror movie he couldn't escape. His marriage suffered under the strain of his silence. His wife knew something was wrong, but Haeberle couldn't talk about it. How do you explain that you witnessed mass murder and did nothing to stop it? How do you admit you photographed children being killed instead of trying to save them? Haeberle grew increasingly isolated, drinking too much, sleeping too little. The photographs sat in a box in his closet, toxic secrets that poisoned his life just by existing. Part of him wanted to destroy them, to erase the evidence and the memories together. But another part knew those photographs were his only redemption, proof that he'd at least documented the truth, even if he couldn't stop the killing. In March 1969, 1 year after the massacre, rumors about My Lai finally reached investigative journalists. A discharged soldier named Ron Haeberle had written letters to Congress describing the civilian killings, demanding an investigation. The Army launched a criminal inquiry. When military investigators contacted Haeberle asking if he'd photographed anything unusual during the My Lai operation, he faced an impossible choice: tell the truth and become a target, or lie and remain complicit in covering up mass murder. Haeberle told them about the photographs. In November 1969, journalist Seymour Hersh broke the My Lai story nationally, revealing that American soldiers had massacred hundreds of civilians. Haeberle's photographs provided the undeniable proof that turned the massacre from alleged war crime into documented atrocity. The color images were published in Life magazine and newspapers around the world. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Americans were horrified that their soldiers could commit such atrocities. Anti-war protesters used the photographs as evidence that the Vietnam War was morally indefensible. Military officials scrambled to contain the damage to America's international reputation. For Haeberle, publication brought relief mixed with terror. The secret he'd carried for nearly 2 years was finally public, but now he was exposed as the man who'd photographed the massacre without stopping it. He received death threats from veterans who considered him a traitor. Former soldiers accused him of staging the photographs or exaggerating the body count. Military officials suggested he should have destroyed the evidence instead of undermining American credibility. The Army charged several soldiers with crimes related to My Lai, but only Lieutenant William Calley was convicted. He received a life sentence that was later reduced to house arrest. Calley served just 3.5 years before being pardoned. The other soldiers involved faced no punishment. Haeberle testified at Calley's court-martial. His photographs entered as prosecution evidence. Defense attorneys tried to discredit him, suggesting he'd manipulated the images or misrepresented what happened. Calley's supporters portrayed Haeberle as a publicity-seeking opportunist who'd betrayed his fellow soldiers for fame. The experience destroyed what remained of Haeberle's mental health. He'd spent a year hiding the truth, then become a pariah for revealing it. He couldn't win. If he'd kept silent, he would have been complicit in covering up war crimes. By speaking out, he became a target for those who wanted the truth. Buried Haeberle struggled for decades with the psychological aftermath of My Lai. He suffered from severe PTSD, haunted not just by what he'd witnessed, but by his role as documenter rather than intervener. In his darkest moments, he wondered if he should have put down the cameras and tried to stop the killing, even if it meant being shot by his own soldiers. Therapists told him he'd done the right thing by creating a historical record. The photographs made it impossible for the military to deny what happened at My Lai. They provided irrefutable evidence that helped change how Americans viewed the war. Without his documentation, My Lai might have remained another covered-up atrocity, its victims forgotten. But Haeberle could never escape the moral ambiguity of his position. He'd photographed children being murdered. He'd documented mass execution. He'd watched through his viewfinder as soldiers killed unarmed civilians. And he'd done nothing to intervene because he was focused on getting the shot. The photographs that documented the massacre also documented his failure to stop it. Every image was evidence of American war crimes and his own moral paralysis. The line between journalist and participant, documenter and accomplice, remained forever blurred. In interviews decades later, Haeberle remained haunted by what he'd seen. He described My Lai as pure evil, an atrocity that revealed how quickly normal people can become monsters under the right circumstances. The soldiers who murdered civilians that day weren't psychopaths. They were ordinary men following orders in an environment where civilian life had been devalued. Haeberle's photographs became some of the most important documentary evidence of the Vietnam War's moral failures. They appeared in history textbooks, museum exhibitions, and academic studies of war crimes. They helped turn American public opinion against the war and established photographic precedents for documenting atrocities. Ron Haeberle died in 2023, having carried the burden of My Lai for 55 years. He never fully recovered from what he witnessed and photographed that day. The massacre defined his life in ways he never wanted or anticipated, transforming him from anonymous military photographer into reluctant witness to history's darkest moments. His story raises uncomfortable questions about the role of journalists and documentarians in situations of extreme violence. Should photographers intervene to stop atrocities or document them for historical record? Is there a moral obligation to put down the camera and become a participant rather than an observer? These questions have no easy answers. Haeberle's photographs provided crucial evidence that helped expose American war crimes and contributed to ending the Vietnam War. If he'd intervened instead of documenting, that evidence might not exist. But he lived with the knowledge that he'd prioritized photography over potentially saving lives. The My Lai massacre revealed how military culture, dehumanization of enemies, and inadequate oversight can transform ordinary soldiers into war criminals. The atrocity wasn't the work of a few bad actors. It involved an entire company of soldiers under the command of officers who either ordered the killings or failed to stop them. Haeberle's photographs also demonstrated the power of visual documentation to pierce government denials and reveal uncomfortable truths. Without his images, the My Lai massacre would have been much easier for the military to cover up or downplay. The photographs made the horror undeniable and helped hold at least some perpetrators accountable. The next time you see documentary photography from war zones or conflict areas, remember Ron Haeberle. Remember the psychological price paid by those who witness and document atrocities. Remember that every photograph of violence represents not just evidence of crimes, but testimony of human suffering that someone had to watch through a viewfinder. This is Classified Hidden Histories, where we uncover the secrets they never wanted you to know. Because understanding the full cost of bearing witness helps us appreciate the courage required to document truths that powerful institutions want hidden. Ron Haeberle's photographs of My Lai remain in the National Archives, permanent evidence of what can happen when military discipline breaks down and human life loses all value. They stand as warning and remembrance, documentation of hell captured by a man who never escaped its shadow. In the end, Haeberle's story is about the impossible choices faced by those who witness evil. Document or intervene, expose or protect, tell the truth and be destroyed, or keep silent and be complicit. He chose to document and expose, giving history its evidence while sacrificing his own peace of mind. That choice saved no lives in My Lai, but it may have helped prevent future atrocities by making the consequences of war crimes impossible to deny.